Anyway, well, let's Dave, let's talk about your background. I'm going to put this over towards me for a second. So Dave, where do you want to start for the viewers with a little bit about your background so they understand, where you're coming from? And I think from our conversation and the part of your book that I have read, people need to let their perception completely go of all the teachings and the indoctrinations that they've had about the system to really connect with your message. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I encourage people to do, interestingly, and not just Income Tax Shattering the Myths, but my other book, Body Science, both of them at the opening, I say, look, if you can't temporarily suspend the tape that's running in your head about this issue, this is going to be a very frustrating read for you, right? And so what I advocate that people do, especially considering Income Tax Shattering the Myths, if they're an accountant or an attorney, I really encourage them to suspend everything that they believe is so. I don't tell them to forget it or jettison it. Just suspend it while reading the book. Then when they've gotten to that final page of the book, they can take all that they have learned and juxtapose it against their previous narrative and see which is actually fact-based and which actually holds water. Because there's no question, and this has been proven, tens of thousands of times with people reading Income Tax Shattering the Myths. Most people who begin Income Tax Shattering the Myths, they open that first page, they're like, okay, well, this should be interesting. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me they bought the book to prove me wrong. Okay, so when they open the first couple and they read the first couple pages of the book, they're reading it kind of with the point of view that, well, we'll see. I don't really put much stock in this, but we'll see how it winds up. And then by the time they close the final page, their perspective is, holy shit, the federal government's been lying to me my entire life and they're ripping off the whole nation. So there's a progression, but it's it's frustrating if people can't suspend the narrative that they've come to believe in.
Right. Right.
Welcome to the party, pal. That line from Die Hard. It's yeah. I mean,
yeah, here we are.
You mean you can't trust the government?
Hard to believe, isn't it? I tell you,
yeah.
There's been sort of a surge of interest in Income Tax Shattering the Myths, and I really believe that the surge of interest is because of what went down in 2020, 2021, and 2022. I believe there's a lot of people that were so outraged about the things the government said and did that it significantly has reduced whatever trust they had in government. Those 3 years really reduced it a lot further. So now they're willing to look at Income Tax Shattering the Myths and said, well, we saw the government do all that crap for those 3 years. Maybe they're pulling some other crap here. And so that ever since the SARS-CoV-2 event, there's been a significant increase in interest for the subject matter.
Right. So what inspired you to write this book? I mean, I think certain people can have, I'm sure people have their opinions I'm just curious, like what, and how did you think it was going to go when you wrote it? Maybe a little bit about that. Cause it seems like people would be hungry for, right? It seems like people would be hungry for this, yet it seems like you have had a little bit of a different experience.
Scott, he's trying to show how naive I was. That's what's going on right here. So first of all, what caused me to want to write it? So I was probably about, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 years into my 17 years of research before I published the book. And I realized I was in a very fortunate position. I owned a couple companies. I had some great guys working for me. They carried most of the water. That allowed me a lot of free time to do all the legal research. And I mean, there was so many people involved back then. Sometimes I would rent a 15-passenger van and drive like 10 or 12 of us to a law library, each person with an assignment, what to go out and look for. You can imagine that's a complex, time-consuming, personnel-intensive effort. And so I realized at probably about the 12-year mark, uh, if all Americans have to go through this, then the truth of the income tax is DOA, because nobody with a job and kids and responsibilities is going to, most of the people are not going to have the freedom to dedicate the sort of research time I did, but they would have no inclination to do so even if they had the freedom. So I said, okay, there was no what I call comprehensive compendium back then, okay, which is what income tax shattering the myths is. It didn't exist. You had this faction promoting one idea. You had another faction promoting another idea. Some of them were right. Some of them were kooky. But there was no comprehensive, reliable compendium that everybody could pick up, read it, get to the end, and say, "I just saw the truth." It was just made clear to me in a way that cannot be disputed. That didn't exist. So I'm like, okay, if no one's going to want to replicate all this research that I and others have done, then the alternative is to somehow make it a lot easier. And a lot easier in my mind was just read one book. Okay? If you can read one book and know 17 years worth of my legal research, boy, that's sure distilling it down and allowing people to learn the truth without all the effort going into it. And I understand. I don't expect anybody to do what I did. I was in a very fortunate position, both as far as time, as far as money, as far as acumen, but that wasn't going to float for the other, 334 million Americans. So income tax shattering the myths is the answer to the question. Now, what did I think when I was writing it? This is the humorous part, I think. I really believed that my fellow Americans had a burning desire for personal liberty. And as soon as somebody gave them a comprehensive compendium so they could stop being stolen from, they'd be like, fuck yeah, I'm on, right? And so I figured there was about that time, it was somewhere in the range of about 100 million Americans filing 1040s every year. So I figured my potential customer base was 100 million people, right? So let's say half of those people decided they wanted to know the truth. That would be, I'd sell 50 million books. The nation would be freed from this scourge. And I happen to be a millionaire in the process, right? It's a win-win situation. I didn't do it for the money, but you get my point.
Right.
Yeah. And so I quickly found out that the vast majority of Americans don't give a fig about this. They are either too afraid. There's that old expression, the last thing a fish would notice is water. So Americans, in terms of the income tax, the propaganda really started in earnest by the government in about the 1950s. So most people who are alive today, they were born into the matrix in terms of government propaganda on the income tax. They've never known anything else. So for the vast majority, in my opinion, they're completely inured to having their property stolen. It's like, well, they've always stolen my property. What is Champion talking about? Why the fuck would I want to stop them from stealing my property? Scamming me. That's ridiculous. I've been scammed since the day I started working at 16. Why would I want to stop that? That seems to be where most Americans are at.
It's funny because taxation by definition is theft. I mean, it really is. But, by the same token, we grow up in a world where people are, that's like the original virtue signal. I pay my taxes. Like that's one of the first signifiers an American would say, I'm a good person. I'm a productive citizen. But, if we read, the intentions of the founding fathers, I mean, this couldn't be further from the original design. And no one ever talks about the tax receipts. They talk about the budget and rates and so on and so forth, but we never get to know how much they're bringing in. And then also the other factor of the money printer go burr, they're just printing the money, and then who pays the taxes is kind of ambiguous. I mean, it's not a direct relationship. It's almost
So
an exercise in obedience.
a
What
couple
do
of
you think?
things. Number one, you talked about the intention of the founding fathers. And one of the things you'll come across when you read Income Tax Shattering the Myths is in the years immediately after the enactment of the 16th Amendment, the Supreme Court dealt with what the 16th Amendment actually meant in several cases. And in one of the cases, Justice White, who was the Chief Justice at that time for the court, he wrote that the purpose of the direct tax, okay, having apportionment, which is not what the income tax is, that the intent of the founding fathers was to prevent the federal government from obstructing the accumulation of wealth. Okay. So something like a progressive income tax, which we know is one of the planks of the Communist Party. Justice White was saying back in 1916 that the founders, when they wrote the provisions, the limitations of taxation into the federal constitution, the reason that direct taxes have to be apportioned is so that they cannot, the actual phrase from the decision is, burden the accumulation of property, real and personal. The way we would say that today is burden the accumulation of wealth. So yes, you haven't read the book yet, but you hit that nail right on the head, which tells me you're really going to enjoy when you read things like the Bruce Shaber decision, because it's going to validate a lot of things that you actually feel, and then the court will agree with you.
Yeah, nothing like spending a few hours being infuriated each day as I read the book. But I imagine there's a liberation component in there, and that's what I'll be reading for sure. It's kind of like this big shift that we've had culturally in this country, and the one thing that really set this country apart more than anything, if I had to pick one thing, because there's a few, is the acknowledgement that our rights are given to us not by the government, but by God. We're born with these rights. They're inalienable. Blah. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. You get what I'm saying?
Unalienable rights.
Rights that they are not bestowed, but yet everyone asks the government what they have permission for. I mean, if I want to go fishing, I have to have a license. If I want to go hunting, I have to have a license. If I want to engage in commerce, I have to have a license, which is typically what they do when they take your rights away and then sell them back to you. But it's that same kind of subservience, because we've been infantilized to the degree that we view government in a parental role rather than in an employee role, even though by all other measure, they are employees, representative government. At least that's the idea. It's been a while since they've represented the will of the people, but you get my meaning here. It's odd how the psychology has shifted to such a degree that, people don't beg the question, even in a economically challenging period such as the one we're in now. 30%, yeah, no problem. 10, 15%, whatever it is, take my money. It's crazy.
And again, the Supreme Court validates you, because I forget the name of the case, but it was one of the very early cases, probably in the first 50 years after the current United States Constitution was put in place. But the court said that was trying to define essentially what unalienable rights are. And it said that those rights, whatever they may be, and the court actually said it would be more tedious than impossible to make a list of those rights. I take it by that they were saying it'd be tedious because there are so many of them, the list would be so long. But it said that those rights existed antecedent to the formation of the states or the federal government, and therefore the states and the federal government may not alter, modify, or abolish those antecedent rights. So again, the Supreme Court agrees with you.
Yeah, it's interesting how many in how many ways the Supreme Court might also agree, and the Constitution and all the founding documents, and yet in practice, there's such a vast ocean of difference here. Whether we're talking about taxation or the Second Amendment, or pick your cause, and the difference is in 1776. We had a robust conversation about this, and we had some passion behind it, and we had this vision of a better thing. And, it's that whole idea of, good times create, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and we go on in this cycle. I think we're at the tail end of the good times create weak men kind of a scenario. Nobody's challenging any of this, but you are. So this is really the at the crux of what I want to get to. Like, and you come from a military background rather than a legal background, as I understand it.
Well, sort of both, but in to comment directly to your point, somebody in an earlier interview today, somebody asked me if, when I learned the truth of the income tax, if I felt personally betrayed, and I said no, I didn't feel personally betrayed, but I felt, once I realized that the United States government is doing this knowingly, willfully, and intentionally, that the people at the top of the tax pyramid, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Undersecretaries of Treasury, not the Commissioner of the IRS, because he's a political hack, but the Chief Counsel's office and so forth, the Chief Legislative Draftsman, these people, they absolutely know what the truth is. Everything you're going to read in Income Tax Shattering the Myths, these guys know, and they've known it since 1913, okay? So, and I'll validate that in a moment. But when I realized that they've known this all along, and especially right after World War II, they started this propaganda machine to basically try and convince Americans that every single American that earns a living owes the income tax. They did that knowing that they were defrauding the American people by disinformation. Okay, and at that point, I didn't feel personally betrayed. I felt that they had abrogated their responsibility to their masters. Because everyone in government is a servant,
Yes.
or at least they should be, right? Whether it's an elected official, an appointed official, they all have to take an oath, and they all are there to be servants to the people. So when the servant comes along and says, hey, man, I'm going to steal the silver from the dining room, the china and the silver. And if you say I can't steal the china and the silver, then I'm going to do something to fuck you up. Okay, we're done right there. Okay, there's a problem. And that's just a sort of a common speech way of saying what the United States government has been doing. Now, I said I would verify that they've known all along what they're doing, and I'm going to explain that. From the time the income tax was enacted, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, you've got statutes, right? But the statutes are what the Supreme Court has called the broad language of the statute. Then, if it's a highly technical field like income tax, those laws go across to the cabinet official who oversees the enforcement of those laws. In the case of income tax, that's the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury then produces regulations that put the meat on the bone, that make more clear that make things much more clear than the statute does. As an example, you can have a statute that's 3 paragraphs. The regulations will be 8 pages. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the point in sharing that is everything you'll learn in Income Tax Shattering the Myths, who the tax applies to, who it doesn't apply to, how it's enforced, what the forms actually mean as opposed to what they say on the face. Okay. The regulations, they wrote the very first regulations for the income tax in 1913, and they've been writing regulations until this very moment. Okay. Every single regulation written by the legislative draftsman at the Treasury Department for 111 years has stayed impeccably within the boundaries of what you're going to read in Income Tax Shattering Myths. Tell me how, if the true narrative was what the disinformation the government puts out to the public, then we would see regulations that say that. There are no regulations that say that. In Income Tax Shattering the Myths, I point out that the income tax has been imposed on just 3 classes of person and nobody else. The regulations for 111 years only talk about enforcing the income tax on those 3 classes of person and no one else. So there's no way for them to stay within those boundaries for 111 years if they don't know those boundaries. But then they go out and tell the American people, they'll say, oh, yeah, Joe, you owe income tax. So Scott, you owe income tax, even though you're not within one of the three classes upon whom Congress imposed the tax. And they know that. When they tell you you owe the tax, they know you're not within any of those classes. And so that was the moment that I felt.
I think if you make enough money,
that was the moment.
You can... Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say that was the moment when I felt that something had to be done, because the people in this tax structure, everyone from Congress to the Secretary of the Treasury, the people at the top of that pyramid, they've been doing this intentionally, and I find that intolerable.
Right.
I agree. Yeah, I got to apologize to the audience. We're plagued with a number of different technical issues this evening. Hopefully that doesn't take away from the content too much. But, something really springs to mind in the forefront here, and that's that originally the intention of federal income tax, it was a temporary measure, am I right? And it was meant to expire in a period of time.
It was temporary when it was enacted in 1862 in order to help fund the Union's war effort. And you're right, it did not sunset. It did, on the other hand, pretty much become a dead letter. Congress created the Office of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue back in 1862. But from the end of the Civil War through 1913, I don't know what that guy did. He went and played golf because there was really nothing for him to pursue. And by the way, I should add, the income tax that was imposed to fund the Union in the Civil War was only a tax on the salaries of government workers. It had no bearing on the public.
Interesting. So how did they provide for the continuation of a temporary measure? Because I mean, it's been a couple of years. We're still hit with this, and the rates seem to be climbing. There's no real accountability, by the way, on how the money's being spent. This year, this last couple of years was a really good example with the Ukraine war. Hundreds of billions of dollars. There's shrimp on treadmills, and $4 million for the flow of the study. The study for the flow of ketchup. Seriously, we're spending.
I don't know if I heard that.
We're spending a mint on, like the tax and spend, where if a truck shows up in a war zone and it's missing a lug nut, they don't send a lug nut; they send a replacement truck.
Right. And on the topic of ketchup, I heard that ketchups, the ketchups that we normally use, Heinz, or there's god awful ingredients in those ketchups.
No, it's tomato flavored sugar.
Corn
syrup.
And God knows what else that they've done.
Right.
That's a whole different topic. But
yeah. I mean, you get the point. It's the corruption game started early, and even though people can point this out, even though it's pretty obvious to anyone paying any attention at all, it's somehow excused. It's just a fact of life or death. You go with it. You just, I gotta pay because taxes, of the threat of force. Well, I'm gonna pay it whether it's reasonable or not. Is most people's take.
Yeah, it's their construct. Yeah, and I agree with you. And that is one of the reasons I wrote Income Tax Shattering the Myths, because the average Joe sitting home saying, oh my God, look at what they took out of my paycheck in the form of payroll withholding. They have no idea. When I've been sitting in restaurants or other social places and the conversation is struck up and somebody brings up that I wrote the book and we start talking about it with people we don't know. And people will offer their, criticism, condemnation. Well, that's not true. That's not true. And that's not true. And I'll often say, okay, can I ask you a question? Yeah, sure. I'll say, can you tell me, not forms, not publications, not letters you got in the mail, but actual law. how many words of tax law have you read? And the universal answer is, well, none. And so I try to be as polite as I can. And I say, respectfully, I've been looking at the tax code for 25 years. You haven't read a single word. These people that are all involved here in this conversation in this restaurant, whose word do you think they should take? Since they're not going to go read it for themselves, should they take the word of the person who's been reading the tax code for 25 years or the person who's never read a word of it? So that illustrates, and of course, I've never had anybody say, even talking to an accountant in a sushi bar one night, I asked him, well, what section is this? And what section, or where would you find that? Well, I don't know. Yes, even accountants don't read the tax law. So my point is that income tax shattering the myths solves that for people. If somebody reads one book, I tell them, when you're done, you'll be the expert in the room. Doesn't even matter whether you're sitting with a tax attorney. You will be the expert in the room. I'll tell you a quick story. I was involved in a phone call. This goes back decades ago. The CEO of a multinational company based in the United States. And he had told the three of the wealthiest men in America that were funding the primary funders for the corporation. He had told them he was not going to fill out a W-4, have payroll withholding done because he knows what the law says, and he does. Okay? He and I are still friends to this day. So these three very wealthy men, they had, I guess, sort of you might call him a fixer, somebody who handled difficult situations for them. So the fixer said, okay, the fixer, the CEO, who is my client, and I were going to meet on the phone with the top tax attorney in New York City, a city that's got a few tax attorneys, right? And her reputation was the top tax attorney. And she and I went at it for about 40 minutes, and she got her clock cleaned. Okay? So, and the reason I say that is that because she would say, well, it's here in the law. And I would say, well, exactly what section are you referring to? Don't tell me it's in the law. Give me a citation. And then she'd give me a citation. We'd go on the internet or bring it up on my computer. And I said, well, you claim it says X, but I'm looking right at it. That's not what it says. Or she would say, well, it's supposed to operate like this. And I would say, well, the Supreme Court in case ABC, the Supreme Court said that's not how it operates. And then we went through this time and time again. She did not make a single point that didn't get shot down. And so my point is in sharing that story, that even the top tax attorney in the city of New York didn't know jack shit about the income tax. So when I say a person who reads Income Tax Shattering the Myths ends up being the expert in the room, that is not an exaggeration. And it doesn't matter who's in the room.
Right, what? Well, I was just going to say, so, obviously we're doing a live and we have people commenting, and I do want the audience to put some questions in here as well. And I have some of my own. And so someone, I don't know if I can read the name exactly right. Oh, it's because Fui, I think. I don't know if I can read it.
Lifeful. No, you're right.
Lifeful?
Well, is that a name? Is that a name?
Lyelf. It's a name I've never heard of or seen or want to try and pronounce. But I will say this. Okay. Their comment is the people who enforce the policies don't know that taxes are voluntary. And you can speak to that in a moment as well. And can throw you in jail, seize your home and your businesses. So what do you say to that comment?
Okay, so first of all, there is no such thing as a voluntary tax, okay? And the income tax is not voluntary. People are very confused by the phrase voluntary compliance. I think we've all heard that phrase, right? But people are very confused about what it means because they've never looked at the history of, say, the IRS, the history of taxation, and the use of the word voluntary within that framework. What voluntary compliance means is this. If you've got U.S. citizens and domestic corporations and non-resident aliens and foreign corporations And they're all involved in the flow of U.S. source income to the non-resident alien or foreign corporation offshore, because sometimes there are U.S. intermediaries involved there. Okay. So that's a process that involves a lot of forms. Those forms, in every case I'm aware of, they're filled out voluntarily in good faith, okay, because people don't want to be in violation of the law. And then at the end of the day, there are information returns that go in. So Joe Blow gives me a W-9, okay? Eventually, I'm either going to withhold or I'm going to fill out another 1099 and send it down the road to the next guy. Then eventually withholding is going to be done. Once the withholding is done, then the withholding agent has to file a tax return on that. And that's all done without a government official. What are you doing? What are you doing right there? Are you doing that right? Did you get it for? That they all do it voluntarily. It's voluntary compliance. Okay. The tax, the imposition of the tax is not voluntary. The payment of the tax is not voluntary. The filing of the return is not voluntary. But voluntary compliance means all the people involved are doing it without somebody sticking a gun in their back, literally each day. Okay. They're doing it because they know it's the right thing and it's what the law requires. That's voluntary compliance. So there is no tax that's voluntary. But can they take your stuff? If you don't know what you're talking about, yes. And here's the thing. The average Joe who thinks he's going to, I don't know, get away with something with the IRS, who believes he owes the tax, or maybe he thinks he doesn't owe the tax, but he doesn't know shit about what the law says. Okay. So what happens is he doesn't understand that there are rules to the game. If you want to challenge the IRS and stand upon the law, there are rules. If you don't, what happens if you go onto a football field and you don't know the rules? What's going to happen to you? You're going to get wiped out. You're going to lose. Okay. So that's exactly what happens to the American people when they think they're going to take on the IRS and they don't know the rules. So what happens when you do know the rules? And I'm just going to use one example. A gentleman back on the East Coast, he owns a auto glass replacement repair business. And this goes back quite a few years. The IRS sent him a letter, said that he owed $5 million in taxes. So after he dragged himself up off the floor from shock, he laughed because he's like, $5 million is the tax I owe? He's like, I wish I'd made $5 million in this business, right? So there are some people out there that are hell on wheels in administrative due process. So he hired one of those people who actually knows the rules and knows upon whom Congress has imposed the tax and who it is not. Okay. So they went back and forth for several months. And in the end, the IRS not only said he didn't know $5 million, the IRS agreed he didn't know a penny. Okay. So yes, they can take your stuff if you sit on your ass, don't know what you're doing, don't form relationships with people who can help, such as some of these people who are hell on wheels on administrative due process and understand the law. Okay. When you do it right, the IRS cannot act. They are barred from acting. And when somebody says, here's what your law says, here's your limitations. Oh, you're right. We were wrong. Sorry. But if you don't know what you're doing and you don't partner with others who know what they're doing, then yeah, you're going to get your ass handed to you. And I think that's pretty much the way of life. If you don't know what the fuck you're doing, you're going to get your ass handed to you in any venue.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, so
it happens all the time in my life.
Well, so I was gonna, there's some people that I know that haven't filed personal taxes in a few years. I won't say who they are. And then there's people who have houses, they have businesses, and they're wondering, okay, what do I do? How do I navigate this? Because I don't want to get my house taken away if I don't pay certain taxes. Like, what is your advice to those people? Because that's been asked to me prior to this, this interview.
So
what's the best way to navigate that?
Okay. Let me start with this blanket statement. Anybody who reads Income Tax Shattering the Myths, when they get to the end, they'll know the answer to this question. Okay. So, but I will give you the short and sweet of it now, because there's a lot more detail than we can get into here on this show.
Of course.
The income tax is a form-driven process, okay? So here's an example. Let's say a guy is, I don't know, he's a carpet cleaner. So he has a lot of contracts for retail establishments and office buildings. So he goes in and he does a nifty job of cleaning their carpets. Then he sends them an invoice, and then they want to pay him. So they say to him, "I need you to sign this W-9." Okay, we probably all are familiar with that. So, and I mentioned in passing a little bit ago that IRS forms never say on the face of the form what the form is really about. Okay, so Americans believe, because they've never read the law, they've just been socialized to believe this and such is true. They believe that the Form W-9 is to be filled out by one American business when it's working on behalf of another American business. If you want to get a check, you fill out a W-9. That's the way it works. And at the end of the year, the company that paid you sends in a 1099 so the IRS can keep track of what was paid to you. They think that's normal. That goes back to what we talked about earlier. They were born into the matrix. They don't know any better. Okay, they don't know that the matrix is not real. Okay, so I'm going to tell you now, and again, a lot of people who own their own business are going to be screaming at you, "That's not true!" What I'm about to say. When they're done reading Income Tax Shattering the Myths, they're going to say, "Yeah, that actually is true." Okay, so here's what a W-9 really means. Doesn't say it on the face, but it means. When you sign under penalty of perjury a W-9, you are attesting that you are a United States citizen or domestic corporation who is receiving U.S. source income that belongs to a non-resident alien or foreign corporation. You are in this pipeline where the money's going from its U.S. source to its foreign owner. Okay? That's what a W-9 really legally communicates to the IRS. Okay? So when you fill out a W-9, it then authorizes the company you gave it to send in a 1099 at the end of the year to the IRS, right? The 1099 to the IRS, what they say when they look at that 1099, they say, "Oh, Joe, I'm going to use your name." They say, "Oh, look, we got a 1099 on Joe. That means Joe filled out a W-9 because the company couldn't give us this 1099 unless Joe filled out a W-9. So Joe testified under penalty of perjury that this money belongs to a foreign person and he's the U.S. intermediary." Great. So, Mr. U.S. intermediary, you either need to give us a 1099 showing you moved the money further down the pipeline to the other U.S. citizen or corporation, or if you didn't do that, then you are obligated to be a withholding agent on the tax the foreign guy owes on his U.S. source income. So, since you're obligated to withhold and pay over the tax, where's the tax return? So, the Secretary of the Treasury in his Treasury decisions has said in no less than 10 Treasury decisions in the last 111 years that Form 1040 is to be used by a non-resident alien with U.S. source income or the non-resident alien's domestic agent. So when the IRS says to you, "Where's the tax return?" and you go, "What tax return?" 1040. The American thinks, "Oh, you mean report my own income." That's not what it means. It means you're going to report the withholding you did of U.S. income tax on the money that belonged to the foreign person before you paid it over. So you withheld what was required in U.S. income tax, paid the foreign person what he's owed, which is the balance other than the income tax. And then on a 1040, as the domestic agent, you report what you withheld and you pay it over. Now, so imagine that, because that's what it really is. That's what it is in law. That's not what people are socialized to believe, but that is what it is in law. So imagine suddenly you don't do that for several years, and for whatever reason, the government really gets a case of the ass and comes along and says, "We're going to indict you." Okay? the poor schmuck thinks he's being indicted and he's going to trial for not paying taxes on his earnings. Everybody else in the process knows what it really is, okay? But the poor dumb schmuck doesn't know what it is. So he's trying to defend himself by saying, I didn't owe my income tax. And the U.S. attorney is snickering, and the judge is snickering, because they're like, this got nothing to do with taxes on the money you earned. You're an American citizen. This is on the non-resident alien or foreign corporations tax money you withheld and never paid over. Because if you hadn't withheld it, that means you would have filed a W-9 on the next guy you sent it to in the pipeline. In the absence of a 1099 showing you sent it down the road, then you were obligated as a withholding agent to withhold it. So where is it? Why didn't you pay us? So you see, and this goes back to what we talked about very early on in the call, it's what the public believes versus what is really taking place. They're so diametrically opposed, it's even hard for the public to appreciate that it could be that insane. Right? Which is why when I come on interviews like this and I tell this story, I say people are going to be screaming at their computer, that's not true, because they just can't comprehend that there's such a huge divergence between what they've been socialized to believe and what the law really is. And that's how they get fucked, because they don't understand the law. And income tax shattering the myths solves that for them.
Well, so I had to, there's a business that Scott and I are now affiliated with, and I had to fill out a W-9 today. Is there a way around? I mean, you can't just say, no, I'm not going to fill out this W-9, can you? I mean, how do you, is that anything that would be, what do you do with that?
Yeah, there's these procedural benchmarks where it's like
I can't say no.
We can't have commerce with one another without somehow being involved in this process
agreement.
Well, no, yeah, I mean it's under duress that we would facilitate this process, but hey, we got to do it, right? I mean, how else are we gonna? Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask something which is kind of silly, but I'm going to ask it anyway for illustrative purposes. Joe, you said today you had to provide a W-9. So when the person asked you to fill out a W-9, was this on an email? Was that on a phone call? How did that happen?
The phone call happened, and they said, this is the procedure. This is what's going to happen. And these are the things we need you to do. And once you do these things, then you can be an affiliate of the company. And then that way there's an agreement upon which if people buy something through the show, then you get your percentage. And it's like standard protocol. So if I don't do that, then we're not going to get our affiliate kickback for a product that we sell, and thank God it's not an MLM. But anyway,
I hear you.
So what do you do?
So here's my point. Here's what I'm getting to. So did you say, and I know you didn't, this is just for illustrative purposes, did you say, man, that all sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, on the issue of the Form W-9, I'm not a person under the regulations of the Secretary of the Treasury, who is the highest tax authority in all of the United States. I'm not a person under those regulations that's required to furnish a W-9. I know that you request them for most people, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure this is a case of first impressions for you. I'll be happy to send you some information, but I'm not legally allowed to provide you with a W-9. Now, I know you didn't say that because you weren't aware, but that would be, when we talk about how to do this, that kind of thing is the first step you take. And you notice when I said, I know it's a case of first impressions, and I'm not a person who's permitted under the law. It was all very conversational. It wasn't like, fuck you for asking me for that form. It's easygoing. It's non-confrontational. It's what I call neutral tone. Okay. So my point is this. You can speculate about what she might have said in that call had you said that, but you don't know what she would have said, right? Because you didn't say it. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are watching this right now saying, well, I know what she would have said. And the reality is you don't. Believe me, I've been at this 30 years. You really don't know what she was going to say. So if she said, here's some things I've heard over the years. You know about that. Yes. My son never fills out these W-9s either. Okay. I've heard that over the years. I've heard, can you provide me with something that I can put in the files to justify why we don't have a W-9 if the IRS ever comes a calling? Well, sure, I can do that. And of course, there's all sorts of gradients there. And of course, we get to the far end of this gradient scheme, and it's fuck you, give me the W-9 or you're not getting any money. Okay. And there are ways to handle that as well. This would, if we did a how-to show, this would be a 5-hour show. But yes, there are ways to handle that. That's
that's probably the advantage of. Well, I was going to say that's probably the advantage of reading.
My thing is,
book.
I want to protect.
It's like
I want to protect you. That's my thing. When I say there are ways, my thing is I want you protected. Okay, whether you sign a form, whether you don't sign a form, I want you protected. So if the IRS ever comes a calling, say 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, and says, why didn't you file a tax return? Okay. I want you to have an evidentiary record established. Who said what to who, when it was said, how it was said, in what venue it was said. Okay. Because remember, we talked about you can shut the government down administratively. And I gave you that story of that gentleman who owed $5 million and the IRS agreed in the end he owed zero, even though he was living well, very well. That's because he had all the evidence. He had an evidentiary file, an evidentiary record. He gave it to this gentleman who knows how to do administrative procedure, and the IRS went away. What you're talking about, and you're perfect, Joe, to talk about this because you are, no pun intended, the average Joe, right? So you don't know how to create that evidentiary record so that if the IRS ever comes to calling down the road, you can shut them down. But there are ways to do that. And yes, so your answer to your question is there's ways to tackle that.
Right. Well, part of our show is interacting with the guests that we bring on the show in a way where if we're vulnerable and we share real life situations like I just did, we don't necessarily know all the answers. And so by presenting that component, I think our audience is going to learn with us, because I'll guarantee you the IRS is not going to get fucking paid from any of the stuff that we're doing. It's never going to happen. And I'll be reaching out to you personally to make sure that my ass is covered.
Oh no! We after the show we'll talk about a retainer.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. They haven't been paid in 4 fucking years from me. So no. I don't mind going on the record because they can fuck off. And I'm just letting people know that's where we're on the forefront, because we didn't just want to do a show that we're just talking out our asses. We're literally putting ourselves on the line to do this stuff. Yeah. As an example.
Yeah, who doesn't love to talk about taxes on a Friday night?
But anyway,
but a lot of people are doing them. A lot of people are doing them, so it's really prescient. And it wasn't very long ago that people became so enraged about a 3% tax on tea that they staged an event that is in the annals of history.
The Boston Tea Party.
Exactly. And this was the kind of spirit that we had. And now we have people arguing for more taxes. We have people literally arguing for the state to take more of your labor, more of your income, because it's the right thing under some moral precept. It's insanity to me. But here's the question I want to get to, and I advocate for this. loosely because, I know this is putting a target on my back, but we're all pretty dissatisfied with our representative government. The outcomes have been terrible. They're getting worse every day. And yet we continue to fund their activities on a daily basis.
And they traffic children with taxes.
It would seem to be, regardless of how representative they are, that in essence, we hold the purse strings. If we were to withhold our taxes, if we go to the HR department and say, I'll be responsible for my own taxes, thank you. If we all did this, and I think the key is to do it en masse, because, otherwise somebody's going to get made an example of. Wesley Snipes, Willie Nelson, we can go on. But
we're going to talk about Wesley in a minute, by the way.
Yeah, if we all did this in an act of dissatisfaction with what they're doing with our money that is hard earned, could that be a meaningful outcome? I mean, we're all always faced with the threat of force. I think that's the one reason nobody's willing to do this. But what do you think?
Well, what I hear you describing is basically a political action, and I'm down with political action. However, if everybody could just read a book and walk away safely, I think that is more palatable to everybody. So I want to share with you, we talked a couple of times now about how the public's perception is one thing and the law says something else, okay? So, and you talked about going to the payroll department and said, I'll be responsible for my own taxes, thank you. So that brings up, we're talking now about payroll withholding, right? So is payroll withholding supposed to be done on the ordinary American in the private sector in any of the 50 states? So I want to share with you something. The command to withhold is at 3402 of the code. But in 3401, they give the definitions that are applicable to that law that demands withholding. Okay? So I think anybody knows that the employer is required to withhold from the employee, yes? Okay, so I need to tell you what the word includes means in tax law. It has different meanings in different area of law, but there's a word used prominently in the tax code, includes and including, okay? And what it means is this. In a definition, it says such and such includes, and then there's a list of items, okay? Those list of items after the word includes creates a category, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say Congress passed a definition for a particular code, and it was the definition of food. That was the word being defined. But it said food includes strawberries, kiwis, blueberries, and bananas, okay? What would the category be that was created by those four enumerated items? Would it be fruit?
Fruit.
Okay. Yes, it's fruit. Okay. So the way tax law works, okay, once it creates the category, which is fruit, even though apples and peaches and pears are not enumerated, they are considered to be included because they fit in the established category. Make sense? Tax law is one of the few areas where you can include things that are never talked about. But as long as the words after includes create a category into which those things can fit reasonably and rationally. Okay, so now I want to read to you the definition of employee for the purpose of payroll withholding. Now pay attention to what it says after the word includes, so you get what the enumerated items are, and then you can tell me what category you think they create. With me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Enough.
All right. This is employee for the purpose of payroll withholding. For the purpose of this chapter, the term employee includes an officer, employee, or elected official of the United States, a state, or any political subdivision thereof, or the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of any one or more of the foregoing. So, if you had to determine what the category was based on the bulleted items, you want me to read the bulleted items again? Okay. Here goes
Yeah,
again.
one more time. Let's do that one more time.
Sure. No, this is a case of first impressions for you guys, so I totally get it. Employee includes officers, employees, or elected official of the United States, a state, or a political subdivision thereof, or the District of Columbia, or any agency or instrumentality of any one or more of the foregoing. Would you say that the category being established there is various government entities?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and you'd be right. So the definition of employee for the purpose of payroll withholding is that the employee is somebody who works for various government entities, okay?
Exactly.
Whether they be agencies or instrumentalities. So then you have to ask yourself, somebody, I don't know, Susie Rottencrotch is the receptionist at a dental office. And the payroll department is withholding from her paycheck because she's an employee. Based on the law Congress passed, because that's the only thing that's relevant here is what the law says, not what the Gallon Accounting thinks, not what the CFO thinks, not what the payroll company thinks. None of that is really relevant. Now, it may be significant, but it's not relevant. Okay? All that's relevant is from whom does the statute allow the withholding to be affected upon? It only allows it to be affected upon employees, which, as you just heard with your own ears, is people who work for various government entities, agencies, and instrumentalities, specifically of the federal government, state governments, or any of the possessions and territories, any place that's under the exclusive legislative jurisdiction of Congress, which is not the 50 states. Okay? So
that's definitely not who we work for.
No, I mean, have I been involuntary conscripted to some scheme that I'm unaware of, nor did I lend my consent to? I mean,
you are.
How did I end
Absolutely.
up well, there we go. Well, there you go. I know it was kind of a redundant query.
Right. Very well said, though.
Well, I'm just saying.
Joe, you asked the question about the W-9.
Yeah, Joe and I are getting real cozy tonight, I'll tell you.
Yeah, thank you, Riverside. Yeah. We will never be using Riverside again.
Well, it's something along those
lines. Oh, my God. Yeah.
So, Joe, you asked the question about what to be said in response to a W-9. That was your question, right? So now let's look at this. Let's look at the same issue with a W-4. So I mean, you can pull up you can sit down with the accounting person and pull this up on your phone and show them, here's what the definition of employee is. Okay. And say, and this was actually, I did a call decades ago with a client, and during the first two minutes or so of the call, the payroll gal for this company said probably 4 times, I have to withhold from Tom, it's the law. And the first 3 times I was like, oh yeah, how are you? How's things been? Just trying to be a little gracious at the outset. After the 4th time she said that, I said, I'm so glad that you've said that 4 times now, because the fact that you've focused on the law 4 times tells me you know the law, and that makes this call so much easier. So if you wouldn't mind, can you please cite that law for me? And of course, her response was, cite it for you? No, I can't cite it for you. I said, okay, you know what? I've been doing this a long time. So perhaps if you could just tell me, like in sort of layman's terms, what it says, but try and be a little bit specific to the language of the statute. If you could tell me that I've been doing this for a long time, I'll know which section you're talking about, and we can go there and look at it. She's like, no, I can't tell you like word for word what it says. So I said, that's okay. I know where it is. You don't have to know. I said, are you sitting in front of a computer? Yes, I am. All right. So I want you to type in your search bar, I want you to type in 26 USC 3402 and let that section come. So she does. So I tell her, okay, if you scroll down to subsection C, you're going to see the definition of employee. Now, I did not even bother to explain includes to her. Okay. So I told her, I said, I want you to read the description of people in that statute, the description of people that are considered by Congress in the law it passed to be employees. Will you read that out loud for me? So she reads it out loud.
Oh.
And when she was done, I said, okay, so no matter how much you want to twist, destroy, mangle those words that you just read, is there any way you can make a case that they apply to Tom that works at your company? That he's the employee as defined by Congress? Her response to me was, I don't want to talk to you about the law anymore. Okay. Now, I will tell you, this story had a happy ending because this was a medium-sized company. And Tom had been working for the company for many years, and he was a valued employee. So what eventually happened was, because I would never speak to anybody like this accounting woman unless the client was on the call, because I discovered early on sometimes they lie after we get off the phone about what was said. So Tom's on the call. He heard that. So Tom, I think her name was Beth, they sat down with the owner of the company. And Tom said, here's what happened. And the owner said to Beth, is that true? Is that how that went down? And she said, yes. He said, okay, you've been doing payroll for 20 years. You didn't know where the law was. You couldn't cite it. You didn't know what words it said. And when you were forced to read the words it said, you could not explain how this embraces Tom. Effective immediately, we're no longer withholding from Tom. Okay. So, but that owner was intelligent and had character and integrity. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's somewhat anomalous. Okay. He's not the average shitbag American. So, but that story did have a happy. Yeah. Maybe I should say he's not the quintessential anti-American American.
Right. Well, when you said it had a happy ending, I wonder if she worked for an Asian spa. But
yeah.
Wow.
So
no, this is just
No, you make this whole tax concept a lot more fun because it's I've been wondering about this. I have this kind of rebel component to I've had it my whole life, and I think Scott has as well. But when
I'm worse.
when you start interviewing people that actually it's not just hypothetical, or I think that it's out here in the ether. But when you've done your due diligence and you've done your research and your shit, and you're validating and verifying these things that we, obviously, with 1913 and Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve, and it's just there's something that doesn't add up. And I guess what I'm saying is you've done your research, and so if people are questioning this stuff, you're going to appeal to people, I would think, that are at least wondering if something's not adding up here. And so when they read your book and they hear interviews like this, they can go, okay, well, this guy gets it, and then you have the goods to back it up. I think that's what's so great about having him on the show. So
absolutely. And I mean, you're the one guy I get asked this question that I've always had, and then I kind of do a soft push on this all the time on the show.
You don't have to tonight.
No, well, yeah, but I mean, I don't want to get an audit tomorrow because of but
I mean, his last name is Champion.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Okay, please.
That's spectacular. No, but I mean, I brought up the Boston Tea Party. I talk about a lot of people are feeling a lot of outrage, but I say if you just don't comply, you don't even need to raise your voice. You just say no. It's that simple. And the first place to do it is with taxes, because that's what's funding all this nonsense. Problem is, I don't know if that's entirely true, because money printer go burr, and because Ukraine money laundering scheme. So I don't know if it would be as effective as I think it. In principle, if we all just said, "Fuck no," tomorrow, well, some wheels would grind to a halt, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think we'd probably revisit the idea of what representative government really means, or this whole concept of, democracy and how it applies to a republic. But is any of that meaningful? I mean, are we too far gone? Is it just criminals running the country to this point until we finally wake up? Where are we in all this?
Okay, so let me share with you.
Sorry.
That's fine. Let me share with you the consequences. And by the way, the same thing is true with business taxes. The Form 1120 that companies file, that's the 1040, if you will, for companies rather than people. The same thing is true. It's still the same thing we talked about with the non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. So it's a scam, whether it's individuals or businesses. So to your question, Scott, if everybody in the country, the businesses and the citizens, just said, let's say right now, today in 2024, because April 15th is coming, right? They just said, we're done. You're not getting a penny anymore from us. So there's a reason that the income tax and the Federal Reserve Act were passed in the same year, in the same congressional session by the same Congress in 1913. The reason is that income tax is what pays the interest on the national debt. Okay, when the banks of the Federal Reserve. Okay,
who prints money?
Yeah. Yes, but the bankers still want.
It's a scam.
It is, but the bankers want their interest. That's how banks function, right? When they make a loan, doesn't matter who it's to, they want their interest. Okay, so the income tax was established same year, Federal Reserve Act, Income Tax Act. So the income tax collected from the American people could be used to pay the interest to the Federal Reserve. Okay, so if everybody stopped paying their income tax, what would banks start doing in terms of loans if customers said, yeah, I'm happy to take out that $50,000 loan to get that car, but you're not getting any interest? What would happen? Okay.
Well,
the bank would say,
yeah.
we're not. The bank would say, we're not getting any interest. Here's your fucking loan. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing that the bank. Remember, the Federal Reserve Board is a government agency. The banks of the Federal Reserve are not. A very important distinction. The Federal Reserve Board is a government agency. The banks of the Federal Reserve are private. So if everybody stopped paying their income tax, so the Secretary of the Treasury contacted the heads of all the various Federal Reserve banks around the country and said, sorry, guys, we're not going to be able to pay you your interest on the debt anymore. What would happen is the banks would say, gotcha, we understand. I hope you're bringing enough money in with taxation because you're not getting any more loans from us. Okay, the bank. So, in a very real sense, this overreaching of authority by the federal government getting involved in everybody's business all across this country, all across the world, playing the world's policeman, all of that relies on the government being able to go out and borrow. Okay,
right.
If the government can't borrow, because the bankers that are lending are no longer going to be getting their interest, so they have no reason to continue lending. The only reason they ever lended was to get the interest, right? And the United States government has typically been seen as a guarantee. People might fail to make their payment on their house or their car, but the government's never going to default. It's going to keep paying that interest, even if they have to restructure it. They know that, so it's a sure thing. But if the citizens said, no more income tax for you, Mr. Government, the government would have to say to the banks of the Federal Reserve, no more interest. At that point, the banks of the Federal Reserve would say, no more loans. So what would happen is the government would have to contract to only providing those services that it's real tax base, things like alcohol taxes and legitimate taxes, import taxes, tariffs, all the taxes the government levied and collected prior to the income tax, okay, plus several of the others that they've instituted over the years that are not income tax. All of that, take the income tax out of the mix, the federal government would have to survive and exist just on those taxes alone. So when people, especially people who are on the political right, who say the government's too big, it's out of control, we need smaller government, get out of our lives, that's the right-wing mantra, yes? Okay, I don't know that they necessarily agree with it because I've seen a lot of right-wing politicians who vote for never-ending spending, but that's the right-wing dogma, right? How do you do that? The way to do that is you stop making your income tax payments. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that it's not an act of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience, has its upsides and its downsides and potentially can be a problem. This is not civil disobedience. This is educate yourself and stop filing the fucking return. It's that simple.
It's pragmatism. It's pragmatism.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not standing up against the government when you obey the law. Okay, it's not civil disobedience. So my thing is, they say again, roughly 100 million people file 1040s a year. I'm like, I want 100 million people to read Income Tax Shattering the Myths and stop. Because that will cause the United States, the federal government, to have to contract back down. I think it's probably impossible to speculate exactly how far it would have to contract, but it would have to contract quite a bit. It would no longer just be able to just spit that money out endlessly. It couldn't because it wouldn't get any more loans.
You mean, so what you're saying is if people just didn't pay their income tax, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah. That's
well, I'm not saying people, because people might include those who actually owe the tax. What I'm saying is American citizens earning their own domestic income in one of the 50 states should learn what the law says, stop filing, and stop paying.
Right.
So I have one question for someone that asked me this. There's a rule that apparently if someone has investments and they have to sell a certain amount of their stocks per year in order to appease regulations, and then they're taxed, and this is in retirement, then they're taxed 20%, 20 some percent on this. So
with capital gains?
Yeah. So basically this person is forced to sell some of their stocks, I forget the exact reason, but then they're taxed on having to sell these stocks, and it's to do with children and finances and family stuff and all that. So
are you talking about 401ks?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So what's the question about 401ks?
So what do you, yeah. So, well, I'm not sure if it's 401k or if it's someone that has investments and each year they have to sell a certain amount. It's about $100,000. And then the government gets their 20% of that. So by this person giving their children the $100,000, they're taxed 20% on this. Is there any way out of that, or what would you suggest on that?
To clarify, so you're saying due to the tax liability, the person has to liquidate a portion of their investment in order to accommodate the liability. So they're forced to whittle away at their investment to meet the demands of the tax burden.
Right. And then they have to pay 20% on that. Yeah, exactly. That they're giving to their
did that clarify things?
It does. And to my knowledge, that is not a current legal requirement. Now, I know that Congress passed a law during the Trump administration, and the Biden administration has been attempting to put it into effect, in which they're saying that you owe tax on unrealized gains. Okay. That is headed to the Supreme Court. And I don't mean that in the sense that someday it will get there. It's there. They're going to decide that case this session. Okay. And what they're going to say is, no, this is unconstitutional, because the Supreme Court, in its evaluation of income tax from 1916 forward, in innumerable cases, has said, for those upon whom the tax has been imposed, it's only on gains separated from capital. Okay.
Aha.
So if you have we'll use stocks as an example. You purchase $100,000 of Apple stock, and Apple stock ends up down the road a bit. Your stock is now worth $400,000. Okay. What the Biden administration is attempting to do with this Trump era statute is say, oh, you had $300,000 in gains. Now, Apple's still got your money. Okay. But what the administration is attempting to do is say, you now owe us tax on the $300,000 Apple still has. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's before the Supreme Court right now. They're going to decide it. And I will tell you, they're going to reference about 4 separate U.S. Supreme Court cases from like 1916 through about 1933, in which the court says that the only thing that meets the definition of income for the purpose of the Income Tax Acts, because there were several of them there in a couple of years, is increases to the capital once separated from the capital and taken for the investor's personal use and benefit. Okay, that and in one case, the court says something, and I'm paraphrasing. We have consistently refused to engage in debate from lexicographers and so forth, and we have it is well settled point of law that this and this alone defines income subject to taxation. Okay, so the Supreme Court has been, and we're talking about the Supreme Court, 90 years ago, but the Supreme Court has been crystal clear on this, and I don't imagine the current Supreme Court is going to jettison several clearly stated doctrinal cases that control the entire issue. I can't imagine the court just saying, "Oh yeah, forget all that. Forget all those decisions that were made back then. We're gonna declare income something totally different now." I don't imagine, especially when you've got 5 originalists on the court. Well, 4 originalists and somebody who leans right now and again.
Well, that's interesting how that would play out with digital assets. The idea that, I'm holding XRP and it goes from 59 cents to $10,000. Well, it's, it's kind of like fine art or something. If they want to tax that event, I don't think it's a taxable event until I convert that into the currency we're talking about, the US dollar. If I don't do that, it's not a taxable event, I wouldn't think, although, I think that's what they're sussing out in Supreme Court at the moment with the very legislation you're talking about. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if you would have to convert it into a government currency. I think, for instance, let's say you had an account. Let's say you had a Bitcoin account. I don't know if account is the right word. I know that each of those has its own terminology for where your Bitcoins are. Okay, your digital currency.
Great point. Great example. Please go ahead.
Yeah. But so let's say, as your point, you originally bought the Bitcoin at 59 cents each, and now they're worth $1,000 each. So you decide you're going to take $200 of each Bitcoin. You're going to take some of that profit and put it somewhere else. Okay. If you were a person upon whom the tax has been imposed, which you're not, if you were such a person, then you would either have to pay the tax because you separated the gain from the capital, or you would have to reinvest it in such a period of time that it was not considered income to you. So you can take it out of Bitcoin and put it in some other digital currency.
But let's just say I decided, kind of like El Salvador, let's just say it is Bitcoin, and I'd like to remain in Bitcoin and never convert it to
the dollar.
Right. So all my commerce is going to occur
in Bitcoin,
in this digital asset that's well outside of this taxable event. I think that's kind of where the push me pull you is happening here, and where a lot of the resistance is to digital assets. By the way,
So
El Salvador, they recently, their entire country's net worth went up by roughly 40%, which happened to be the gain in Bitcoin recently. So, I mean, it speaks a lot to sound money over, this moronic exercise of the United States dollar.
The way that would work is if a person is someone upon whom Congress has imposed the tax. Okay, so they're like a non-resident alien with a U.S.-based Bitcoin account, and so the value of their investment keeps rising. Okay, and that's one of the things about digital currency. It's not so much a currency as it is an investment vehicle that you can use as a currency. Okay, so let's say the person upon whom the tax has been imposed starts using the Bitcoin account to pay for the porn he's watching. The government then would say, all this money you spent on porn, you owe us taxes on that. You didn't reinvest it. It wasn't for business. It was for pleasure. It was for you personally, for your interests. And therefore, everything that you spent, you now owe us taxes on. But again, that's only if it's a non-resident alien or foreign corporation and the Bitcoin profit was generated as a U.S. enterprise, U.S. source.
And this gets me back to, I think, what gets us on track for kind of the whole gist of the book. Brass tacks, dispel the myth that we are liable, that we owe federal income tax. I mean, if you could sum that up, because I think that's really the crux of the value of this conversation and your book. And I know it's a lengthy book, but if you could approach that topic a bit, I think.
Sure. So we have laws against murder, right? So the best way to not get prosecuted for committing murder is not to commit a murder.
Correct.
Makes sense? Pretty clean, pretty sterile, no arguments. Okay.
Right. Which a lot of people in government actually do. So that's yet another reason.
Yes.
That I don't want to pay. I don't want to support pedophiles. So that's part of why I don't want to be in that system myself. But anyway.
I mean, often the reason I don't commit murder is because there's laws.
Yet the people that run the system are the ones that are doing. Anyway, just to let our audience, like we know what we have an understanding of what's going on, so we like to speak to our audience, realizing the amount of nefarious activities that the people who are imposing these laws are actually committing themselves. So please go ahead.
The world's run by criminals.
The world, it's run by criminals. So go ahead.
Okay, so a prosecutor and the defense attorney for a person who is accused of committing a murder would have to match, and this goes to all law, would have to match the facts of the case to the law. They would have to overlap to make a case. Does that make sense?
It does.
The law says if you do these things, you're in violation. Okay, so based on the facts, did those violations occur, right? The same exact thing occurs in income tax. Congress has imposed the income tax on non-resident aliens with U.S. source income, foreign corporations with U.S. source income, and U.S. citizens residing abroad earning foreign income. There's no fourth class. Those three are the only people upon whom the income tax has been imposed by Congress. So the way to safely walk away is to make sure, we talked about the evidentiary record we mentioned in brief a little bit earlier today, to make sure that if challenged, you can go into the administrative forum or hire somebody who's hell on wheels with the administrative procedure. You can go into the administrative forum and say, you seem to be under the presumption that I'm a non-resident alien with U.S. source income, or perhaps you think I'm a withholding agent on a non-resident alien with U.S. source income, and I should have paid over his taxes to you using a 1040. One of these seems to be the impression you're under. So let's compare what Congress has said with the facts of my situation. Okay? So you end up then going on the record. Remember, the burden of proof is on the government. Now, it's great because there's a long-standing principle that the burden is upon the taxpayer. Burden of proof is upon the taxpayer. But that presumes it's a taxpayer. The burden of proof is not upon me. I'm not a taxpayer. Okay. So
I love it.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to go in, and it's called evidencing the administrative record, so that the government has nowhere to go, because they can't show that you're a non-resident alien with U.S. source income. They can't show that you're a U.S. citizen residing abroad with foreign earned income. And they can't show that you are a withholding agent on U.S. source income that belongs to a foreign person. If they cannot show administratively, on the record, factually, that you meet any of those criteria, they cannot proceed against you. Now, the Supreme Court, back, I think it was in the 70s, said that Congress created the definition of taxpayer, and that people who work for the Treasury Department, who work for the IRS, can't change the definition that Congress created. So if Congress, by its laws, said the income tax is only imposed on the three classes, I won't repeat them, but the three classes of people, then employees for the IRS can literally be sued under tax law. They can be sued personally for damages if they exceed the constitutional scope of the income tax. And that's, of course, part of that. When these people who are so talented in the administrative forum, when they lay out all this evidence for the government, they also make the government, whoever the agent is who's receiving the paperwork, they also make sure that they're aware that there is a statute that allows them to be sued in their personal capacity for violating the constitutional boundaries of the tax. Once they've been shown, let me be clear about that. Once they've been shown the facts.
So, all right. So we're talking about the individual. This makes a lot of sense. So let's say someone is a small business owner or a business owner, and they filed letters of incorporation. Does this change their liability status?
No.
No.
It doesn't matter doesn't matter because, again, the three classes: non-resident aliens with U.S. source income, foreign corporations with U.S. source income, and U.S. citizens residing abroad with foreign earned income. So if somebody goes out, as an example, and creates an LLC, right? They still don't fit into any of those categories. Mm-hmm. They still are not within any of the three classes upon whom Congress has imposed a tax. So that LLC at the end of the year, this is what I mentioned ever so briefly earlier, that LLC at the end of the year, if was really liable, they would file an 1120, right? A business return. But they're not liable. That business is not liable. It doesn't matter whether it's a corporation.
What would the strategy be for? Let's talk about a fledgling small business. So many of them are wrecked in in the COVID era, and people are trying to rebuild. I think this speaks to a lot of folks out there. What is the strategy? Because there's this huge fear of running afoul of the IRS. I mean, one of the largest ammunition purchases by the federal government was on behalf of the IRS. Mm-hmm. Weapons and ammunition. I mean, that's kind of a terrifying prospect. I only say that because it emphasizes the point that people don't want to run afoul of the guys with guns, the threat of, force. So,
okay. So
what do we do?
Let me just talk about criminal prosecution for a moment, because that, of course, is something that people are legitimately afraid of. About, was it 8 or 9 years ago? The IRS stopped reporting how many tax cases were prosecuted. Okay. The final year of their reporting, in a nation of 330 million people approximately at that time, they prosecuted 329 people. Okay. So it should be the first thing we should say is the odds of being criminally prosecuted, and that number, every expert who has looked at it has said that number has continued to fall. So as the population has gone up, the hard numbers of how many cases are prosecuted has fallen. It's probably somewhere down in the 200 range now. Okay. So in a nation of 334 million people, 200 being prosecuted, your odds, your odds are better at winning 50 lotteries tomorrow than getting prosecuted by the IRS. So I think that's an important thing for people to understand. But secondly, and I hinted at this a little bit earlier, you create that evidentiary record. Okay. We talked about, Joe, with you, what would have happened had you said to the person who wanted you to sign the W-9, I'm not a person who's required. You had that conversation. Maybe she would work with you. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd agree to see additional information. All of this would be memorialized. You have a phone call with her. You type an email. Hi, you said this, I said this, you said this, I said this. If I misstated your position, please let me know immediately. All of this goes into an evidentiary file. So what you're doing is you're showing, I attempted to comply with the law. There's no question what the law says. It's very clear. I attempted to comply with the law. This dipshit, whether it was from ego or fear or ignorance, whatever, this dipshit refused to be obedient to the law. So you create this evidentiary record, and essentially, remember I said what would happen if the IRS contacted you 5 years from now? Essentially what happens is this evidentiary record gets turned into an administrative filing with the IRS. And basically the ultimate message is, I've obeyed the law, these dipshits didn't. If you have a problem with somebody violating the law, go talk to her. She's the one that violated the law. I am 100% in compliance with the law, and here's all the evidence that I have accumulated each year, throughout each year, that I have attempted to communicate the law to these people, and these people have been disobedient to the Secretary of the Treasury. So you need to go correct them, not me. Okay, that strategy is how that $5 million assessment disappeared.
You're such a treasure, Dave. I swear you've got to come back on the show on a regular basis. I'm loving that. I mean, I spent so much time being pissed off about these things, and I'm really, really pleased to hear someone, speaking the truth. It's amazing. And then we've got, here's the flip side. Here's the people arguing for greater taxation, are the roads people. Like, well, what about my roads? Who's going to pay for the roads?
The county.
Do you have a response to that? Because I know it's a ridiculous thing, but yeah.
Well, and real quick, yeah, I mean, someone had asked, can you lawfully opt out of the death tax? Is that something that you can also talk about, or how does that...
after Roads? Okay,
after Roads.
Yeah, we got to talk to the roads people.
The more roads, more roads.
Yeah.
So the things that people have said to me over the years, well, if people didn't pay their income tax, these things wouldn't get done. Virtually all of them are state and county taxes. They have nothing to do with the federal government. Also, the Grace Commission, when Ronald Reagan was president, he impaneled something called the Grace, well, it wasn't called the Grace Commission. It's got a very long, lengthy committee name. But because the chairman of W.R. Grace at that time was the chairman of the committee, it got dubbed the Grace Committee, Grace Commission. And Ronald Reagan posed 10 questions to the Grace Commission. One of those questions was, what happens to the income tax the average American pays? And the Grace Commission reported back to Ronald Reagan in their final report and said 100% of the income tax goes to pay the interest on the national debt, and not one penny pays for any services or infrastructure that the citizen imagines it pays for when they pay their income tax. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes. So it's in it's great that I got to share the Grace Commission. It's great that I got to share the Grace Commission story, because it goes back and verifies Ronald Reagan. I know the Grace Commission report was 87, something like that. So the Grace Commission report verifies what I shared with you earlier, that the income tax and the Federal Reserve Act were passed in the same year by the same Congress, because the purpose of the income tax is to pay the interest on the loans the government takes out. And the Grace Commission told Ronald Reagan exactly that.
And why are we continuing to tolerate this arrangement with the Federal Reserve? I mean, it is well within our rights as a sovereign state to coin our own money. I think it's about 75% of the national debt really is interest owed. I mean, this, we're all slave to this, and it's clearly a scheme. I mean, there was no logical reason for this arrangement. But we've never.
Oh yes, there was. Oh, there absolutely was a logical reason. There was, and the logical reason was number one.
But it had to do with corruption.
Number one, to make bankers wealthy. But number two, are you familiar with Keynesian economics?
Oh yes, Keynes? Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Keynes is the one that when people said, "What happens when it comes to an end?" and he's like, well, everything comes to an end. Like he had no, I mean,
no real answer.
Obviously, this thing was going to come to a bitter end, and there was no solution offered whatsoever. And we're there right now, today. We're at the end.
So back in 1913, the pitch, if you will, for the Federal Reserve, and I don't know if you remember, they voted for it late on a Sunday night, going into Christmas, when most of the congressmen and senators had already left for the holidays. Because, of course, we didn't have jets back then.
Well, Scott was around then, but I wasn't. Yeah. Scott was there. I was not. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So the pitch was, if we have the Federal Reserve, a fiat currency, and the income tax to pay the interest on the loans that the banks are making to the Treasury Department, then we can dominate the world stage because we're creating money out of thin air. Okay.
Yeah.
And we can dominate. And of course, that ended up after World War II, the Bretton Woods Conference and that agreement, and then the World Bank and the dominance of the U.S. dollar being the petrodollar and the world's reserve currency. All of this stems from the original vision of what could be accomplished if the government could institute a Federal Reserve type system with a fiat currency and an income tax. This was all a plan to achieve something which probably seemed pretty appealing to the government officials at that time. But as you say, what's the end game? What happens, like we talked about? What if the American citizens, all of them, suddenly pull their heads out of their ass, read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, and stop filing? Again, not civil disobedience. Just, I know it doesn't apply to me, so I'm done. What if 100 million Americans who formerly file 1040 stop doing that? We'd now have to talk about, so what happens when that great idea that you had in 1913? What happens when that great idea comes to an end today?
Right. Well, fractional reserve lending, I think, had an awful lot to do with this. Banks like creating 9 times, it started out as 9 times the amount on deposit. Now, I don't think it's a no holds barred game. It's just creating money out of thin air. And the petrodollar, which is clearly come to an end. I mean, that's when all these dollars come home to roost. What is that going to do to our monetary supply? I think that's why we're playing the Ukraine game, is because everybody that knows anything about this knows that we're at the end. We're at Keynes' no answer.
About 8 years ago, the United States government stopped publishing the volume of money report. So it stopped telling the American people, stopped being transparent about how much money that was being printed and sent around the world. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that the government stopped doing that. And the reason is that the federal government wanted to pour dollars into the Swiss bank accounts of every violent, disgusting potentate on the planet. The reason is, if some guy who's in charge of some country someplace, some vile piece of shit guy, but he's in charge, right? But the U.S. government, through its financial aid programs, he ends up with $200 million in a Swiss bank account. He's not going to want to tank the dollar because he's got the dollar. So,
right.
So basically, the intent has been and continues to be to conscript everyone into supporting the dollar, because people are holding so many dollars they can't afford to work against the dollar, which is pretty much what's crippled Brexit. Nobody wants to cooperate with Brexit because they're all holding dollars, because the United States has spent the last 12 years or so handing out billions and billions and billions of dollars to everyone around the world. And they think they're rich on dollars. So they won't cooperate in undermining the dollar as the world's reserve currency because they'd be undermining themselves.
Bingo. So it's this illusion, this agreed upon lie that everyone's hoping doesn't get disrupted because, boy, imagine the effect if it was.
Yeah. Well, imagine
that's
what the question
where we're
mark
at
would be.
now. We are at the end.
Perhaps. I say perhaps because I'm 64 years old, and I've been hearing this is unsustainable since I was probably 12. Okay. So, because I had a lot of political adults around me when I was young, and I've been hearing the narrative that this is unsustainable since I was 12. So, do I think
it's always been true?
Well, I suppose in theory, but it's never the chicken has never come home to roost. Okay, in my lifetime so far, will the chicken come home to roost? Presumably, yes. When? I don't know. It's like people. I don't know if you're aware of this. Christian leaders have been saying since about 100 AD, now is the time Jesus Christ is returning to earth. And every generation for 2,000 years, every generation of Christian leaders has said, now is the time Jesus is returning. So 2,000 years later, he still hasn't returned. So I use that as a parallel to when is the chicken going to come home to roost in this particular Federal Reserve fiat currency arrangement? I don't know. People have been telling me since I was...
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, people have been telling me since I was 12. Oh, next year, I'm 64, and I'm hearing the same rhetoric.
But isn't it propped up by the threat of force, though? I mean, look at what happened to Libya when Gaddafi talked about gold backing his currency. Look
Absolutely.
at what happened to Saddam Hussein when he talked about trading oil in the euro. Look at everyone else that we've gone to war with. There's an economic component that threatens this very construct.
Sure.
So it really is the threat of force. And now we're militarily, we're as weak as we have ever been, I think, historically speaking, by comparative analogy. I
think that's a government promoted narrative. I don't believe that's true. I don't think we are the weakest we've ever been. I think that's a narrative that's being put out to justify more defense spending.
That could be. That very well could be. Well, that could be entirely true. That's a really creative one. I mean, they've been creative in the past, but that's
by the
really
way,
creative.
You are right. You are 100% correct that it's backed up by force. Yeah. If you try and upend the United States government's monetary dominance in the world, oh yeah, they'll kill you. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And that's exactly, as you pointed out, that's exactly why they killed Gaddafi.
Yeah, in Africa, I mean, it's the most resource-rich, largest continent in the world, and yet, I mean, where is the civilization on scale? Where are the big cities? Where's the economic power? And it's because intelligence agencies, not just the United States, but everybody got together to pay off these warlords to keep things at a status quo, so that those resources could be exploited without any real opposition. I mean,
true.
These are pieces on the board, and I think these borders and countries and so on, I think we can kind of dispense with the illusion to a certain degree, at least as a thought exercise, and realize that this is a compendium of criminals that have really kind of brilliantly, you have to give it to them, devised a system where we're all willingly this time of year. I mean, it's much more painful for the guy that has to write the quarterly check or the semi-annual check for his tax liability, but it's another thing for the the wage earner where it's already taken out of his check each paycheck. Doesn't even really think about it. It's just sort of an automatic thing, and that's most.
All that needs to come to an end. That's the real thing. All those things you just described with the American citizens, that needs to come to an end because it's a complete scam.
It is.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, have you ever heard of Operation Ajax?
Ajax?
No.
No.
Okay. The reason I bring the reason I bring it up is it validates what you were just saying about Africa, although it wasn't Africa, it was Iran. So in 1953, Iran had a president, get this, a Muslim president who believed in secular government. Okay. And
Say that again. Secular what?
secular government.
Oh,
So
right.
he was personally a Muslim, but he believed government should be secular. Okay. That there should be
This
a
was before the
separation.
clerics came in.
Oh,
So
much,
this would have
yeah.
been what, the 70s?
No,
Yeah.
no. This was 1953 is when he was when
53.
Operation Ajax kicked off. So he was like the perfect guy you would think that the West would want in charge of an oil-rich land. But what he did is he said to British Petroleum, "Look, we've reviewed the accounts. You have owed us for years 15% of the value of every barrel that leaves Iran. Our accounting review shows that you've paid us $3 or 3% a barrel, not 15% a barrel. So we want you to pay the balance that you owe us." So what happened is British Petroleum, and of course, especially back in the 20th century, British industry and the British intelligence community were as one. So BP went to MI6 and said, "You've got to do something about this." So MI6 went to the CIA, and the CIA created Operation Ajax, which was an operation to remove Mossadegh, that's the president, to remove Mossadegh from office. Okay? And then they put the Shah in, who was this little tiny man, and I mean that mentally, like a very petty little man. And he had the Savak, which was this vicious secret police, and that led to the Islamic Revolution, which gives us the Iran that we have today. And it was all so that British Petroleum didn't have to pay the Iranian government what it owed them and had stolen from them. And if it required getting rid of a good, honest, secular president, we did it, which directly led to the problems we have with Iran to this very day. So you're right. That validates what you're saying. It's always a manipulation of lands that we don't.
Thing is largely a show. Yeah, I mean, if sensible government were suddenly to land in Iran, I mean, think of the liability that would represent for the United States and the West. And I think, and I don't know the dates on this, but I think what you're describing is the advent of the Five Eyes, right? When all the intelligence agencies decided they could share information in a way that circumvented an awful lot of privacy laws.
I think 5As came around in the 70s, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
The late 70s, if I'm remembering correctly. But my point was that...
Well, that was the fall of the Shah, right? That happened...
No. Because
Iran-Contra was in the 80s, so it would have been later. You're right.
Yeah. And Five Eyes is really about worldwide spying. It's about those five nations sharing all the information, any piece of information that anyone is talking about anywhere in the world. And the way they do that is it's against the law for the United States to monitor our communications, right?
Right.
But it's not against the law for the Australian government to do that. And the Australian government is one of the Five Eyes. So the Australian government can monitor U.S. communications, turn that information over to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government didn't actually do it. So the U.S. government didn't violate the Constitution. Five Eyes is a very slippery arrangement.
It's the admission of the corporatization of the intelligence globally. And I think, I mean, maybe this is a stretch, but I think it's a declaration that this is well beyond any border. That there's a larger ownership stake here. There's a larger mechanism governing the way the pieces move around the board, and we're still playing conveniently within the language of borders and sovereign states and entities. But I don't think that really exists in the mechanic of things financially or administratively when we talk about intelligence. What do you think?
Have you ever read the quotes of General Smedley Butler?
I don't think I did. I have.
Oh my God. You guys, when we're done here, You have to Google Smedley Butler quotes. Okay. He was, at the time, he was the highest ranking Marine Corps general in history. And after he retired, he came out and he was so blatant. He said, I've traveled all over the world, killing people all over the world. And the only reason I ever killed anybody, the only reason I was ever given orders to kill anybody overseas was so that American corporations and their allies could make money.
Wow.
Yeah. Smedley Butler. Yeah, you'll see he's got a ton of them.
I just opened a browser window for that because I did not want to forget that. That sounds fantastic.
And it was funny because
something up. Oh, go ahead. After this, I want to bring something up for you guys.
People have accused him of being a communist because he spoke at communist meetings. And when he was confronted by people saying, you went and spoke at communist meetings, he was like, yeah, I want everyone to understand what we're doing. So his point was, I'll go talk to the Republicans, the Democrats, the Socialists, the Green Party, which didn't exist back then, right? I'll talk to anybody who has a meeting so I can tell them the truth about what the United States military is doing. We're going around the world killing people so the U.S. corporations and their allies can make money.
Right.
Wow.
So there's a video that came out. This, things pop up on different social medias. I think a lot of viewers are familiar with the gentleman named Billy Carson. So this came up in the last couple of days that I've seen it, and it's only a minute long. I'm going to play the audio so both you guys can hear this, and it's about mortgages and taxes. So that being said, here we go. Hold on. I'm going to play this.
190 million Americans. Imagine if, now out of that, all of them don't have jobs, right? Let's just say 90 million working Americans that are actually on the streets, free to move around. Let's just say out of the 90 million, 40 million say, you know what, we're not going to pay the mortgage payments and the taxes anymore. Matter of fact, we've been collaborating, and we've saved up for a month or two. We don't need any gas or food for a month or two, so we're not even going to go shopping. We're not going to get on public transportation. We're not going to use our cars. We're done. We're going to take 2 months off. You know that thing you did to us with the global pandemic when you shut everything off? Well, we're going to shut everything off now. Except we won't turn it back on until you negotiate a better deal with us, because you work for us. We don't work for you. You are our servants. That's what the government is. You're servants, but you got it where they're telling you everything you can and can't do, and you're afraid of them. What if we turned off the planet collectively and said, you know what, we're done. Talk to us when you send a representative that we approve of, and we'll start the negotiation process.
Was that Billy Carson?
That's Billy Carson.
Yeah, I like Billy Carson. What'd you think of that? Could you hear that okay?
Oh, yeah, perfectly.
Oh, good. Otherwise, it wasn't Johnny Carson.
No. So, what do you think? I mean, this is the whole idea that,
if collectively...
Well, this is why division is the number one weapon of every government, is because solidarity is the antidote for government. And they know that. And they've always known that. Yeah. But still, trying to get people to act with any kind of solidarity is, it's herding cats. It's worse than that. It's so difficult.
So my answer to Billy, I don't say answer to Billy, my response to Billy's attempt, which, by the way, I think is a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong. But from my point of view, living the life that I have lived, and my experiences, I would say to him, really? Because I can't get millions of people to read one fucking book.
Yeah. That's the best response I could have hoped for.
Yeah.
So
you've done the work.
We think they're really going to put their asses on the line and risk potential hardship and whatever. I mean, I hear what he's saying, that it's all pre-prepared and everything. If you can't get someone to read a book, you're not going to get them to go through all those measures. But by the way, I agree with him. If this impossible thing was possible, it would be powerful. It's just Americans don't have don't have the nuts to do it.
Can you hand me the book?
Yes.
So, I'm going to propose something. It's right there. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to propose something. I know this doesn't look like the most exciting read, but I think, having heard the author here for a while, you can understand it probably is the most exciting read. Joe and I have not yet had the opportunity to read it.
I've started, but there's a lot more to delve into.
Right, but we're going to read it. And I'd like to invite the audience, buy a copy, read it, and then we can all have this conversation together in a really, like a book club kind of a way.
Yeah.
As many episodes as we need, because, this is essential to our freedom.
Yeah. Instead of Fight Club, we'll do
Tax Club.
Book Club. Book Club.
Book Club. There we go.
Yeah.
But yeah, buy the book. And just if anyone's wondering right now, where can they get the book?
Go to drreality.news. That's drreality.news. Just click on store. You'll see my various writings there that you can purchase, including Income Tax Shattering the Myths. We talked about this at the outset, but I'm really enthused to come back and talk to the two of you after you've completed Income Tax Shattering the Myths. And imagine if your audience had all read Income Tax Shattering the Myths. Now we're having a conversation where everybody is fully knowledgeable. That's
it's a
powerful.
Movement. When you see our subscribers go down to about 10,000, you'll know this movement's taken off.
Well, just to let the audience know, look, we are so in the
shadow ban box.
The shadow ban box. Yeah, I mean, we've lost. I mean, the one thing, there's not an arrogance that we have about our show, because our show is about our guests. We're guest centric. There's very few times. I mean, there might be times, when a guest leaves on a Friday Night Live, that Scott and I will shoot the shit with the audience. But our goal is to shed light and showcase our guests. And so when we start seeing the quality of the guests get even better with people like you on, people like Keith and Angel, that I met at the 12 Senses Club through Dr. David Martin. And I want to give a shout out to Kim, who's doing a wellness class, and to Stan, who's part of the Cardio Miracle. He's going to be on next Friday. When we have the caliber of guests that we have, and then we drop 700 people in the last 2 months, and we have plenty of friends reaching out to us that are part of Rumble, and we're losing, not only is it us, but it's plenty of other people that have shows on Rumble, and we're losing subscribers. We're not losing guests, sorry. Losing subscribers. And then we have people reaching out to us saying, hey, I am a subscriber to your show, and I was kicked off.
I have to resubscribe again.
Yeah, I had to resubscribe. So it's really frustrating, and we're trying to build something. Yeah, it's certainly about Scott and I building our brand to some extent, but people have tried to coach us. I'm just going to be very transparent. You guys need to do this and you need to do that, and you're going to build it up, and it's like, look, we're guest centric, and we're doing this for humanity, and we're doing this for our guests. If something happens where, Scott and I can actually make some kind of a living off doing our show, that's great. We would love that, but that's not why we started. We got started on this because we started learning about human trafficking, that we've been lied to for many years. I've reached out to plenty of people in the media that work for newspapers. They don't want to hear a damn thing that I'm saying. I've been accused of, killing my own dad because of my perspective of what's going on by COVID from my own family members. We're doing this because we're in the fight, and we're just trying. Our goal is to get the message out that is so not heard.
Somebody has to tell.
Someone has to fucking do it. And look, in Washington, we're in Washington State. We don't see anyone else in Washington State doing this. Maybe a little bit in Oregon, maybe some in Idaho. I don't think Blonde and
the torches and the pitchforks out here are unbelievable. But
yeah,
but what Joe's talking about is, and this is really comical. You might as well, since you brought it up, share.
Yeah.
So I think for like 6 months we've been at just about 30,000, but all of a sudden we'll drop 200-300 people, at a time. It's never like
in a couple weeks
gradual thing. It's
just
several hundred all at once, and then it'll build back up, and then several hundred more. And I'm just, what is the impetus for several hundred people to leave at the same time?
Have you reached out to Rumble support?
Well, I don't know if it's Rumble or something outside of Rumble.
No. We know a guy named Mel Carmine. He runs a show, XRP QFS, something 1776 or something like that. Anyway, he's written a letter to Rumble. We have plenty of Rumble folks that they see the same thing. They literally cannot grow. And if the more over the target you are, and the more you talk about subject matter like this, the more repressed you are. I'm used to it. I mean, I've lost 10 channels on Twitter. I have a music video that went from 30,000 views, and they shut the whole channel down. They shut Nick Alvear's channel down. They shut Bruce Poppy's channel down. We're used to it. But that the part of the thing is we're trying to get, people like you get your information out there, and on every fucking level it is suppressed.
Well, and the larger statement here isn't so much about woe is TruthStream or anybody else that Shadow Ban.
No.
What there's two things I want to point out. One
Please.
is your reality is curated. It is heavily curated. What you are allowed to see and so on, it's extremely curated. And that's the problem. That's why everybody's in the matrix. That's why everybody's paying their taxes, and it's a virtue. And that's why all of this stuff is happening, is because of that construct. So at the very least, if we can identify it, that's something. The flip side of that is, in the truther circles, there's an awful lot of repetition. People talking about the same thing a lot. There's this truth fatigue that seems to be happening,
For sure.
and people just don't seem to have the time. Maybe they want to place more of an emphasis on, I don't know, their pets, their hikes, whatever it might be, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, there's been a dangling carrot now for 4 fucking years, and whether people are into Q or not into Q or whatever, they're tired. They're sick of this shit. And I am too. I mean, there's times like Scott, I'm working on, I'll just be transparent. I'm working on 2 new songs, and one of them's for Louis Herms, God bless him. And I'm very excited to work on it. And honestly, I'd rather be working on that and taking hikes and walks and doing stuff for myself and my health. Scott's working on a new product as well. And it just feels like, my God, we want to put our time into stuff that actually matters, that we aren't going to be shut down from,
I think what we do does matter. I mean, we would.
Well, I know, but
we're certainly not doing it for the money.
Well, when you're constantly repressed, I'm so fucking used to being repressed most of my goddamn existence on this planet, with just bad business partners, just learning lessons. I mean, it's prepared me for where I am at now. But man, 4 years in and still people not waking up. It's relentless, and there is fatigue from people in this movement. Absolutely.
Well, and that's it. Like I said, it's curated.
Oh.
And that's why this conversation about taxes is so key. I mean, it's at the heart of it all. We're talking about the pistons in the engine, aren't we?
Absolutely. And when you say, 4 years in, I feel you, Joe. I'm 30 years in.
I know, exactly. And we're not even, I mean, the people that have been more awake than us, I can't imagine. You look at some of the truthers, the gentleman that lost the fingers, trying to explain to humanity by the alien abduction when he had to
Adair?
go. What's that?
You talking about Adair?
No. I forgot his name right now. Anyway, there's so many truthers that have been in this movement for decades. I'm glad I didn't wake up sooner. I mean, for me, it was like, going to a U2 show in Sacramento in 2018. And it's like, wait a second. Why is now there, there's a Mephisto character from Bono, but now there's this really weird, twisted, animated, teeth coming down. It looked very evil. And, the more that I've learned about the world that we're in, I mean, part of my awakening is walking out that door right now and Scott telling me the world that you think you're living in and the world that you're living in are not even the same. And then
two different things.
Two different things. And I've seen U2 16 times. And for me, learning that Bono's part of the Illuminati, I mean, it really took a lot for me to even come back from that. I mean, and
to be so emotionally moved over something and then to realize that it's a fraud.
Well, who even wrote the songs?
That's a real violation.
If you've sold your soul and Satanists cannot create, like, who wrote the Beatles songs? What did they, they're part of the One Eye Club. Who, most of the music that we've grown up on, it's just, it's so much to process. And then on top of it, we're doing our due diligence. It's a full-time job to get the word out, and then your numbers go down. It's just, Scott and I, we do this show because we're friends first. We're not a business first. That's great if something happens, but the integrity in our friendship and our message is what's most important. We know if we can get by and we can pay our bills and we have shelter and food, we're doing better than most people trying to get into this country. We're fine. Yeah, we could use a little more support. That's great. But in the end result of all this is our integrity. That's what we have going forward into the future. And that's the guests that we want to have on. And Dave, that's what you represent. That's why we're so thankful and excited to have people like you on our show, because that is the fabric. That's the tapestry of our show.
Well, hey, we're lucky to have an impact, and we are having an impact.
Right.
And as Orwellian as everything is, it's not that Orwellian yet. So, I mean, I don't know.
There's still time
doing this. Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of time, guys, I hope you don't mind. I've been up since 5:30 this morning, kicking it in super overdrive. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have to beg off at this point so I can go get some sleep.
No, we do. Just give the folks, just let people know where they can find you on your website, your social media. And we're not going to do much longer tonight because I want to make sure that everyone focuses on this. So please go ahead.
So drreality.news, drreality.news. If somebody wants to drop me an email, dave@drreality.news. If they want to follow me on Rumble, the Rumble search engine is a little weird. If they enter just Dave Champion, people tell me they don't find me. So enter Dave Champion PhD, and that will typically do it. And of course, on X, just search for Dave Champion and see my little shiny face in the little logo, and go ahead and follow my X page.
Well, thank you, Dave, so much. I mean, you've made taxes actually really entertaining tonight. Here's the book, and audience, please get your hands on a copy. I'd love to have a conversation with you all. And Dave's going to come back, and I think we're going to have a much more meaningful exchange in that event. So
at least educate. We'll be educated on what he's written. So
yeah, completely. And thank you for the tips and the inspiration that you've given to our audience this evening.
Thanks, guys. And I look forward to talking with you more, both on the air and off.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody.
I'm going to call you tomorrow.
Okay, guys. Good.
At 5:30.
All right, guys.
not at 5:30. All right. Take care, Dave.
All right, Dave.
Keep fighting the good fight. All right.